Hi, this is PD at BurgZerg Arcade at BurgZergArcade.com, and this is tutorial number 89. Now in this tutorial I wanted to go over the input manager. So let's go ahead and open up Unity. Now originally when I was planning to use the input manager, I thought you could actually set these values through script, but apparently you can't. So in our second wave of tutorials, we'll create our own custom input manager or use one of the publicly available ones, so that players can actually adjust things in-game. But I still want to go over the input manager that comes with Unity because it is a fairly useful tool. And aside from the fact that you can't edit it in-game, it's pretty complete. So to access your input manager, you'll want to come up to Edit, go down to Project Settings, and just select Input. Then over in the inspector, you'll have your input set up. So you'll start off, you have a size 17, and if you open these up, you'll notice, they have a name, descriptions if you want to put them in. You'll have negative and positive values as well as alternate values as well. I'm not going to bother going over what all these values mean because Unity actually has them up on their website. If you look at their input page, and it gives a fairly good description of what everything does right here. One thing I would like to point out though is the button names. To access certain buttons on the keyboard or your mouse or even your joystick, they have certain input formats and they define them right here. I'm going to be using the number keypad on my keyboard for these tutorials, so I'm going to want to make sure that I enclose all my values in these little square brackets. So let's shut down Firefox and let's just jump in and make a new one. So in order to make a new input value, I guess we should look at the list I want to create. I'm going to open up MonoDevelop. And at the very top of my script, I've gone ahead and sat down and thought, well, what values do I actually need for my camera to work right? Well, I want a button that's going to rotate my camera. I'm going to want to be able to get the mouse Y and mouse X inputs for when I'm moving the camera around. And I'm also going to want to set up a rotate camera button. I'm going to be using the number 4 and number 6 on my keypad, but you can use any keys you want. And all it's going to do is just replicate the same functionality that we're getting from holding down the right mouse button and swinging your mouse around. But instead of doing it with the mouse, we'll be able to use the number keypad. And I'm also going to set it up to have a button that you can hit to reset the camera to your default view. Now I haven't actually put the code in for that yet, and since I've been sick for the last week and we're pretty far behind, I want to get everything done by the end of December. I'll probably wait to the second wave of tutorials to actually implement this feature as well as the scroll wheel. So let's go back into Unity and we'll set up the camera button. So I'm just going to cut and paste the name that I actually gave it. So it's rotate camera button. And in Unity, in order to add a new one to the bottom, just increase the size. So it starts off at 17 by default. I'll make it 18. And if you look down here, you'll notice it made an exact copy of the one that used to be last. So I'm just going to come in and rename it. Now the name you give it is the name you're going to access it through your script. So make sure your spelling is right and it's fairly descriptive. And let's also give it a descriptive name. So I'm going to say button, I can spell it all right, mouse, button to use to allow the user to rotate the camera. And if you have a negative value to it, if you look at some of these, let's go to horizontal. This is what we're used to move the character around. You'll notice it has a negative button set up as left and a positive as right. Now these are the arrow keys. And you'll also notice the alternate is A and D. These are the ones I'm used to using. The negative just kind of like moves in one direction, positive in the other. Since this is just a button that we're going to press down and hold, we don't really need a negative value. And I'm not going to bother entering one in or a negative description. Same as for the alternate buttons. I just want to allow the right mouse button. So if we come over back into Firefox and we look up for the mouse button, we can see that the right mouse button is actually mouse 1. and there's a space there, so we'll make sure to enter that. And in case you're not sure, the first button, the left button on your mouse is mouse 0. Then it goes to mouse 1 for your right mouse button. And if you have a third button, it's mouse 2. And if you have a bunch of buttons on your mouse, you'll have to figure out which ones come in what order next. I've only ever used the first 3. So I'm going to go back into Unity. And the positive value, or positive button, is going to be mouse 1. I'm not going to bother playing around with the values because it's just going to be a button that I'm holding down. Well, I guess I'll just 0 them out. And I'm going to want to set it to the type, to key or mouse button. There's other options here. I've never used window movement, but like I said, they're all pretty self-explanatory. The axis, I'm not going to be moving it around at all, so it really doesn't matter. Now, I've used the X, Y, and the third axis, which is your scroll wheel. But I've never used the 4th to 8 axes. So you're on your own for those. And the joy number. I've always just used the first option, get motion from all joysticks. I've never had it set up where you had multiple joysticks, but I can see if you're making some sort of arcade style game where you have more than one joystick, it could be useful. So I've got this set up now. So I'm going to copy the name one more time. And I'm going to go into Mono Develop. So if we scroll down to our update function, we'll notice that we're getting the input of the get mouse button down and get mouse button up, and we're using the right mouse button. Now we're implicitly saying, the right mouse button in code, and the user may not want that, and they can actually change it at the start of the game. And let's give them that option. So I'm just going to get rid of the actual mouse part. So we'll say get button down, and we'll want to put the name of the axis that we defined, which was rotate camera button. And we'll get rid of the mouse here, so it just says get button up, and make sure to include it in quotes, rotate camera button. Now if we go back into Unity, it should work the exact same once it starts up here. There we go. Except now we're not binding it to the right mouse button in code. Instead, we're using the input manager. So if you ever wanted to change how that functionality works, you wouldn't have to come through all your script and change everywhere. You could just open up your input manager and just change it there. So the next one I want to add is to be able to rotate my camera by using the 4 and the 6 on the number pad. And before I do that, I'm going to go into Mono Develop. And if I open up Late Update, and I notice right here where it's checking to see if I have the mouse button down, and it assigns new values to my X and Y and rotates accordingly. I'm actually going to move this section of code out to a new function because we're going to be reusing that, and there's no point in typing the same code out. So I'm just going to make a private function. It's not going to return anything, and I'm just going to call it rotate camera. And it's not going to take any parameters, and I'm just going to paste this in, and I'll tab it in, and then up here where I cut it out, I'm just going to call that function. So rotate camera. I'll do a quick test just to make sure it's working. And it should be fine. So I hold down the button. Yep, it's working. Okay, so I'm going to come over to the input manager. I'm going to increase it by 1, so I'm up to 19. And like before, copy the one that used to be last. And I'm going to change the name. Now the name of my script that I'm going to call it was rotate camera horizontal buttons. So I'll go back into Unity and I'll just paste that in. And I'm going to rename this for the description, and I'm just going to say the keyboard buttons to rotate the camera horizontally. The negative description name, same thing. Now the negative button, I'm going to use the number 4 on the keyboard, on the keypad. So I want to enclose that in the square brackets, as it says to do here on the Unity page. And for my positive value, which will rotate right, I am going to use the 6 on the number pad. Now you can set up alternate buttons as well, but I'm not going to. I only want to use the 4 and the 6. And for the gravity dead sensitivity, I'm going to leave it blank for now. And I'm going to end this one right here since we're just over 10 minutes, and I'll quickly start a second one here. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.